The day my manager started waving a new lease agreement around like a victory flag, the entire store went quiet. Customers stopped browsing, employees stopped breathing, and for the first time in 3 years, I realized silence was about to cost far more than speaking up. I used to think every workplace had that one person, the one who could drain the warmth from a room just by stepping into it. For us, it was Greg. Technically, he was the store manager. According to the company directory, he was responsible for operations, customer satisfaction, and team leadership. Those words always made me laugh a little. Not because they were funny, because they sounded like they belonged to someone else entirely. Greg's real talent was humiliation. He treated it like a management strategy. The store sat on the corner of a busy downtown block, wrapped in tall glass windows that reflected the city like a polished mirror. During the day, sunlight spilled across the polished floors. At night, the lights inside turned the place into a glowing display box floating against the dark street. From the outside, it looked welcoming. Inside was a different story. The moment Greg arrived each morning, the atmosphere changed. Conversations became shorter. Smiles became careful. Every employee developed the strange ability to look busy even when there was nothing to do. Nobody wanted to become the target. And sooner or later, everyone did. "Is this really the best display you could come up with?" That was one of his favorites. He never asked quietly. He asked loudly enough for customers to hear. One afternoon, he stood beside a seasonal display and called over a college student named Ryan. Poor kid had been working there for barely 2 weeks. Greg folded his arms dramatically. "What is this supposed to be?" Ryan blinked. "A spring promotion display." Greg looked around at nearby shoppers. "You hear that?" Apparently, this is a spring display. A few customers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Ryan's face turned red. Greg wasn't finished. "My 12-year-old nephew could do better." The silence afterward felt heavier than the boxes stacked in the stockroom. Ryan stared at the floor. Greg walked away, smiling. That smile stayed with me longer than the conversation. Because it wasn't frustration, it wasn't disappointment. It was enjoyment. And that was the part that bothered me. Most of us learn to survive by staying quiet. Arguing only made things worse. The few employees who challenged him never lasted long. Their schedules changed. Hours disappeared. Performance reviews suddenly became negative. Nothing obvious enough to report. Nothing direct enough to prove. Just enough pressure to make people leave on their own. So we adapted. We nodded. We apologized. We kept our heads down, including me, especially me. I had worked there longer than almost anyone else, 3 years. Long enough to understand every shelf, every inventory system, every customer complaint before it happened. Long enough to know that Greg depended on employees far more than he wanted them to believe. But I also understood something else. Knowing someone's weakness isn't the same thing as being able to use it. So I stayed silent, month after month, year after year. Then things started changing. At first, the signs were small. Contractors appeared outside the building. People in business suits visited the store more frequently. Measurements were taken. Photographs were snapped. Occasionally, I would notice Greg speaking on the phone in a tense voice near the back office. Every time someone approached, he lowered it immediately. One afternoon, while I was organizing inventory, I passed the office and heard something unusual. Greg sounded nervous. Not irritated, not angry. Nervous. The difference was impossible to miss. "I understand," he said. A pause. "No, we're committed." Another pause. "I'll review the numbers." Then silence. When he noticed me walking past, he shut the door. That had never happened before. A strange feeling settled in my stomach, like hearing a distant crack of thunder on a sunny day. Nothing had happened yet, but something was coming. The following weeks only made the feeling stronger. Greg became more unpredictable, more impatient. His outbursts grew sharper. Even customers noticed. One regular customer actually asked me if management had changed. I almost laughed. If only. Then came the morning everything shifted. It was early. The store hadn't opened yet. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through the break room. Employees moved through their routines with sleepy expressions and half-finished conversations. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Greg walked in carrying a thick folder. Not a tablet, not paperwork. A folder. He looked unusually pleased. That alone made everyone uneasy. He gathered the staff near the front registers. Nobody asked why, we just assembled, automatically. Years of conditioning. Greg placed the folder on the counter, then he smiled. The same smile he used before embarrassing someone, the same smile Ryan had seen, the same smile dozens of employees had seen. Only this time it wasn't aimed at a person. It was aimed at all of us. "I've got some important news." The room became still. Rain tapped against the glass. A customer tested the locked front door before realizing we weren't open. Nobody moved. Greg slowly opened the folder, and for a brief second I noticed something strange. Not everyone looked worried. One employee in particular stared at the folder with an expression I couldn't quite understand. Not fear, not curiosity. Recognition. As if they'd already seen what was inside. And that tiny detail made my pulse quicken, because suddenly it felt like the real meeting hadn't started yet. It felt like everyone had unknowingly walked into the first moments of something much bigger, something that could change far more than a work schedule. Greg looked up. His smile widened. Then he began to speak. Greg let the silence stretch before speaking. He loved silence when he controlled it. It gave his words weight, or at least he thought it did. The folder remained open on the counter between his hands. The fluorescent lights reflected off the glossy pages inside. Rain continued tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. "I've been working closely with corporate and the property owners," he announced. Property owners. That got everyone's attention. Even the employees who usually stared at the floor looked up. Greg noticed. Of course he noticed. He always enjoyed having an audience. "As most of you know, our lease is up for renewal." A few people exchanged glances. Most of us hadn't known that. Commercial leases weren't exactly common break room conversation. Greg continued. "The landlords have proposed new terms." He paused, dramatically. Then he sighed, theatrically, as if he were carrying some enormous burden for the good of the team. "The increase is significant." Nobody spoke. The room felt smaller somehow. Outside, a bus rolled through the rain, its headlights sliding across the wet pavement like pale ribbons of light. Greg flipped a page. "We'll all need to make sacrifices." There it was. The phrase landed heavily, not because of what it meant, because of who was saying it. A strange tension moved through the group, like a cold draft nobody could locate. "What kind of sacrifices?" someone asked quietly. Greg smiled again. That smile. Hours, benefits, training budgets, every possibility ran through my head. Then he answered, "We'll need to improve productivity." A vague statement, deliberately vague. Several employees relaxed slightly. I didn't. Whenever Greg avoided specifics, it usually meant the specifics were bad. He began listing changes, new performance metrics, reduced staffing during slower periods, tighter scheduling controls, additional reporting requirements. Every item sounded harmless alone. Together, they painted a different picture. More work, fewer people, less flexibility. The familiar corporate equation, and Greg presented it as though he were delivering wisdom from a mountaintop. A few employees nodded reluctantly, others stared at the floor. Then I noticed something odd. That same employee from earlier, Maya. She worked inventory and receiving, quiet, observant, the kind of person who noticed things without advertising it. She wasn't listening to Greg, she was watching him. Specifically, the folder, and the expression on her face had changed. The recognition I'd noticed earlier was now mixed with something else. Disbelief. For a moment, our eyes met. She looked away immediately, but not before I caught the warning hidden there. A warning about what? I had no idea. And somehow that made it worse. Greg finally reached the end of his presentation. So, that's where we are. Nobody applauded. Nobody thanked him. A few people muttered polite acknowledgments. The meeting appeared finished. Then Maya raised her hand. The room froze. Not because raising a hand was unusual, because almost nobody ever challenged Greg publicly. His eyes narrowed. Yes? Maya spoke carefully. Can we see the lease proposal? A tiny shift, almost invisible. But I saw it. Greg's smile flickered, only for a second. Then it returned. It's management material. Maya didn't sit down. I've worked with lease documents before. Another silence. A heavier one. The kind that makes people suddenly interested in their shoes. Greg closed the folder halfway. That's not necessary. The answer came too quickly, too sharply. Something moved across Maya's face. Not surprise. Confirmation. As if she'd just verified a suspicion. That feeling in my stomach returned, stronger now. The distant thunder was getting closer. Maya slowly sat down. The meeting ended. Employees scattered. Conversations immediately began in whispers. Questions, speculation, concerns, the usual aftermath. But Maya headed directly toward the stockroom. I watched her disappear through the swinging doors. A few seconds later, curiosity got the better of me. I followed. The stockroom was cooler than the sales floor. The air smelled faintly of cardboard, packing tape, and machine oil from the pallet jack. Rows of shelves stretched beneath industrial lights. Maya stood near the receiving desk, waiting, almost like she'd expected me. You noticed too, she said. Not a question, a statement. I nodded. What am I noticing? For the first time all morning, she smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had just realized a puzzle was finally solvable. The numbers. What numbers? She looked around carefully before speaking. Greg's version doesn't make sense. I folded my arms. What version? The rent increase? Now she had my full attention. Maya lowered her voice. My brother works for a commercial property firm. The room suddenly felt very quiet. I asked him about this building. I stared at her. You did what? I got curious. Rain rattled softly against the loading dock door. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then Maya said the sentence that changed everything. The increase Greg described doesn't match anything the owners are asking for. A chill moved through me. Not because of what she'd said, because of how certain she sounded. You sure? Very. The confidence in her voice was unsettling. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't theorizing. She knew something. And if she was right, then Greg had just stood in front of the entire staff and built an argument on information that wasn't true. But why? That was the question neither of us could answer. Yet. Maya reached into her bag. For a second I thought she was about to show me something, some document, some email, some proof. Instead she stopped. Her hand froze. The color drained from her face. I followed her gaze. Across the stockroom, near the office hallway, Greg was standing there, completely silent, watching us. And from the look in his eyes, I couldn't tell how much he had heard. The next few minutes suddenly felt far more important than the meeting itself. If Maya was right, we had stumbled onto something. And if Greg knew that we knew, the conversation that followed could change everything. If you've ever watched someone hold power through fear and wondered what happens when the cracks finally start to show, you're not alone. Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear what you would have done standing in that stockroom. The story is only getting started. The stockroom seemed to shrink around us, not physically, emotionally. One second it was rows of shelves, stacked cartons, and the familiar hum of fluorescent lights. The next, it felt like a stage where every movement suddenly mattered. Greg stood near the office hallway, motionless, watching. The distance between us couldn't have been more than 30 feet, yet it felt much farther. Maya's hand remained inside her bag, frozen. The color had drained from her face so quickly, it was almost startling. I turned slightly. Not enough to appear defensive, just enough to see Greg clearly. His expression revealed nothing. That was unusual. Normally his emotions arrived before his words. Annoyance, smug satisfaction, impatience. Now there was only calculation. A cold, quiet calculation. Then he smiled, not broadly, just enough. "Everything okay back here?" His voice echoed softly through the stockroom. Maya removed her hand from the bag. Empty. "Of course." Greg nodded. The silence stretched. For a moment I wondered whether he would approach us, whether he would ask questions, whether he would directly challenge whatever conversation he suspected had happened. Instead, he adjusted his tie, then walked away. The office door opened, closed, gone. Only after several seconds did either of us breathe normally again. "What was in the bag?" I asked quietly. Maya stared toward the office, then finally looked at me. "Something I don't want him seeing yet." Yet. That word landed heavily. Not ever, not today. Yet. There was a difference. A significant one. Before I could ask another question, the receiving door buzzed. A delivery truck had arrived. The moment shattered. Work resumed. Boxes appeared. Invoices needed signatures. Customers filled the sales floor. The day moved forward. But underneath everything, something had changed. The air felt charged, like the atmosphere before a summer storm, invisible, unmistakable, and impossible to ignore. A few hours later, I found Maya again. The afternoon crowd had arrived. Sunlight pushed through thinning clouds, casting bright rectangles across the floor. The store looked beautiful. That was the strange thing. Important moments rarely happened in dramatic settings. They happened under ordinary lights, among ordinary sounds, while people bought ordinary things. Maya was checking inventory near the back aisle. I waited until nobody was nearby, then spoke quietly. "You still haven't told me what was in the bag." She looked around first. Another thing that caught my attention. People only check their surroundings when they believe someone might be listening. Finally, she answered, "Copies." "Copies of what?" Her jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought she might refuse. Then she sighed. "The lease summaries." I stared at her. "What lease summaries?" "The real ones." The noise of the store seemed to fade, not literally, just the way it does when your brain suddenly prioritizes one piece of information above everything else. I lowered my voice. "How did you get those?" She hesitated. Long enough for me to realize the answer probably involved someone trusting her, or someone making a mistake. Either way, she wasn't going to explain. Instead, she said something more important. They don't match what Greg presented. The words settled heavily between us. I had suspected that. Hearing it confirmed was different. Facts have weight. Rumors float. Facts sink. And these were beginning to sink very quickly. What doesn't match? Almost everything. That answer sent a chill down my spine. Almost everything. Not one number, not one interpretation. Everything. A customer entered the aisle. The conversation stopped instantly. We returned to work. The customer wandered away several minutes later. Only then did Maya continue. The rent increase exists. I nodded. Okay. But it's nowhere near what he claimed. My pulse quickened. How far off? She gave a humorless laugh. The kind of difference that changes the entire story. I stared at her. She stared back. Neither of us needed to say it. If Greg had exaggerated the situation, there had to be a reason. People don't create fear without purpose. Especially people who enjoy controlling rooms. Especially people like Greg. A loud voice suddenly cut across the store. Inventory update. Greg. Even from 50 feet away, he somehow sounded like he was standing beside you. Maya immediately returned to scanning products, conversation over, at least for now. But something about Greg's timing bothered me. Had he seen us talking again? Had he been watching? The question lingered long after the moment passed. And strange things kept happening. Little things, tiny things, the kind most people would dismiss. Twice that afternoon, I noticed Greg leaving the office carrying papers. Each time, the papers disappeared before he returned. 3 separate phone calls arrived for him. Every call seemed to worsen his mood. At one point, he actually snapped at a customer over a minor return policy question. That wasn't like him. Embarrassing employees? Absolutely. Customers? Almost never. The behavior felt desperate. And desperation was new. Late in the day, another detail emerged. One of the assistant managers, Carlos, accidentally left a spreadsheet open on a workstation near customer service. I wasn't snooping. I simply happened to walk past. The document displayed labor projections, budget forecasts, scheduling allocations, nothing unusual. Until I noticed the dates. They stretched months beyond the supposed crisis Greg had described. Months, maybe longer. If the store was truly facing the kind of emergency he'd outlined that morning, those projections shouldn't have looked so stable. The numbers didn't prove anything, but they raised another question. And questions were accumulating rapidly, like dark clouds gathering over a city skyline. One by one, they seemed harmless. Together, they promised a storm. That evening, after closing, most employees left quickly. Nobody lingered. The day had exhausted everyone. The parking lot shimmered beneath fresh rain. Street lights reflected in puddles like scattered gold coins. I was halfway to my car when I heard footsteps. Maya. She approached briskly, looking over her shoulder once, twice, 3 times. That alone was enough to make me uneasy. Then she handed me a folded envelope. Nothing else, just the envelope. What is this? Don't open it here. Her voice was barely above a whisper. The seriousness in it immediately erased any temptation to joke. I looked down at the envelope. Plain, unmarked, ordinary, which somehow made it more unsettling. When I looked back up, Maya was already stepping away. Wait! She stopped. I lowered my voice. Why me? For the first time all day, uncertainty crossed her face. Not fear, not panic. Uncertainty. As if she had asked herself that same question. Then she gave an answer I wasn't expecting. Because you stayed. The words lingered. 3 simple words. Because you stayed. Before I could respond, she walked away into the rain, leaving me alone beneath the parking lot lights, holding an envelope that suddenly felt much heavier than paper should. And for reasons I couldn't fully explain, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever was inside it, Greg did not want anyone reading it. The envelope sat on the passenger seat the entire drive home. I glanced at it at every red light, every stop sign, every pause in traffic. It never moved, never changed. Yet somehow it seemed to dominate the car, a silent presence, a question waiting patiently for an answer. Outside, the city drifted past beneath damp evening light. Rainwater glistened on sidewalks. Storefront signs reflected across wet pavement in streaks of blue, gold, and white. Normally, I listened to music during the drive. That night, the radio stayed off. The silence felt more appropriate. By the time I reached my apartment, curiosity had become something stronger. Not excitement. Tension. The kind that settles between your shoulders and refuses to leave. I locked the door behind me, dropped my keys onto the kitchen counter, and stared at the envelope. For several seconds, I simply stood there, listening. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic beyond the windows, a neighbor's television somewhere down the hall. Ordinary sounds, an ordinary evening. Except it wasn't. Finally, I opened it. Inside were several photocopied pages, commercial lease summaries, property correspondence, financial notes. Nothing dramatic at first glance, no shocking headline, no giant red circle exposing a scandal, just paperwork. The most dangerous information often looks boring. I sat at the kitchen table and started reading. 5 minutes later, I stopped, then started again from the beginning, because I was convinced I had misunderstood something. The numbers didn't align, not even remotely. The rent increase was there, Maya hadn't lied. But it was significantly lower than what Greg had described during the staff meeting. Not slightly lower, not open to interpretation. Different. Clearly different. I continued reading. The deeper I went, the stranger things became. There were references to improvement incentives, renovation credits, temporary adjustments designed to help long-term tenants. The property owners appeared eager to keep the business, not squeeze it, not punish it. Keep it. That detail echoed in my head, because it completely contradicted the atmosphere Greg had created. His version had sounded like an approaching disaster. These documents painted a very different picture. And then I found something else. A handwritten note, short, simple, attached to one of the copied pages. The writing wasn't Maya's, at least I didn't think it was. One sentence had been underlined twice. Projected savings exceed lease increase. I stared at it, read it again, then a third time. Projected savings exceed lease increase. If that statement was accurate, then the foundation of Greg's entire presentation collapsed, not weakened, collapsed. I leaned back slowly. The kitchen suddenly felt colder. Outside, wind rattled against the building. A storm was moving through. The timing felt strangely appropriate. My phone buzzed. The sound startled me. I looked down. A text message. Maya. Only 4 words. Did you read it? I responded immediately. Yes. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Returned. Then another message arrived. Now you understand. I stared at the screen. Understand what? I typed the question. Her reply came almost instantly. Not everything. Just enough. Before I could continue, another message appeared. Different sender, unknown number. My stomach tightened. The text contained no greeting, no explanation, only a single sentence. Be careful who you trust. I froze. For several seconds, I simply stared. The message remained there, cold, simple, unsettling. I checked the number. Nothing familiar. No contact name, no clue. I looked back at Maya's conversation, then the unknown message, then back again. A coincidence? Maybe. But it didn't feel like one. The apartment suddenly seemed much quieter. The storm outside grew louder. Rain tapped against the windows. Wind pushed softly against the glass. And somewhere deep inside, instinct began pulling at me. That old human alarm system that notices danger before logic catches up. I messaged Maya. "Did you send this?" I attached a screenshot. Several minutes passed. No response. Then, finally, "No." The answer arrived alone. No explanation, no follow-up. Just no. A chill crawled up my spine. Because I believed her. The next morning arrived gray and heavy. Low clouds covered the city. The sunlight never fully appeared. By the time I reached the store, several employees were already gathered near the entrance. Something felt off immediately. People were whispering, checking phones, looking toward the manager's office. The tension was impossible to miss. I stepped inside. Ryan, the same employee Greg had humiliated months earlier, approached me. His expression was unusually serious. "You heard?" "Heard what?" Ryan glanced around before speaking. "Carlos called in." The assistant manager. I frowned. "So?" Ryan lowered his voice. "He didn't call in sick." A pause. "He quit." I blinked. "What?" Ryan nodded. "First thing this morning." That got my attention. Carlos had worked there for years, longer than most of us. Steady, reliable. The last person anyone expected to leave without notice. Did he say why? Ryan shook his head. No one knows. But something in his expression suggested he wasn't completely convinced of that. Neither was I. Before either of us could continue, the office door opened. Every conversation stopped. Instantly. Greg emerged, carrying a stack of papers. His eyes swept across the room, not casually, searching, evaluating, looking. And when his gaze landed on me, it lingered a fraction longer than normal. Not enough to prove anything, more than enough to notice. Then something unexpected happened. Behind Greg, through the partially open office door, I caught a glimpse of a desk covered in documents. Most were ordinary paperwork. One wasn't, because even from a distance I recognized it. The copied lease summary, or at least a version of it, the exact page containing the handwritten note. Projected savings exceed lease increase. My pulse kicked hard. The door closed. The document disappeared, but the image remained burned into my memory. And suddenly a new question emerged, one far more dangerous than the others. If copies of those documents were inside Greg's office, then who had access to them before Maya ever handed me the envelope? Next, Chapter 6. The question followed me all day. Who had access? Not who should have had access, who actually did. There was a difference, a very important one. The store moved through its usual rhythm. Customers wandered the aisles. Shopping baskets rattled softly against display corners. Receipt printers chirped. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from the cafe next door whenever the entrance doors opened. Normal life, normal business. Yet beneath everything, an invisible current pulled at my attention. Every time Greg emerged from the office, I found myself watching. Not intentionally, the way people watch dark clouds gathering on the horizon. Because sooner or later, they matter. Around noon, Maya finally arrived. Late. Unusually late. The moment she stepped through the employee entrance, I knew something was wrong. She looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. Like someone who hadn't slept. Our eyes met briefly. She gave the smallest possible shake of her head. Not now. Message received. The opportunity to talk didn't come until nearly an hour later. We crossed paths in receiving. The loading dock was empty. Only the distant hum of refrigeration units filled the space. "What happened?" I asked. Maya checked the doorway first, then answered. "I think somebody knows." The words landed hard. "Knows what?" "About the copies." For a moment, neither of us spoke. I thought about the anonymous text, the warning, "Be careful who you trust." Suddenly it felt less mysterious and more personal. "Did something happen?" Maya nodded slowly. "When I got home yesterday, somebody had been asking questions." A chill moved through me. "What kind of questions?" "Questions about me." That was enough. No dramatic threats, no broken windows, no confrontation. Sometimes questions are worse. Questions mean someone is gathering information. Questions mean someone is preparing. Questions mean someone already suspects something. The sound of footsteps interrupted us. We separated immediately. Seconds later, Greg entered the receiving area. His timing was becoming difficult to ignore. He glanced between us, smiled, then walked past without saying a word. The silence he left behind felt heavier than any speech. By late afternoon, the atmosphere in the store had become strange, not tense, focused. Employees were noticing things. Whispers moved through departments. Carlos's sudden resignation, the lease discussion, Greg's behavior. Individually, each detail meant little. Together they formed a picture nobody could fully see yet. But everyone sensed it, like the outline of an object hidden beneath a sheet. Then the call came. Corporate. Not for Greg. For the entire management team. The announcement spread quickly. A regional representative would be visiting the following morning. That alone wasn't extraordinary, except for one detail. Greg's reaction. The moment he heard the news, his confidence cracked. Only briefly, only for a second. But it happened. I saw it. Maya saw it. Several others saw it too. Fear. Real fear. Gone almost instantly. Yet once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. The rest of the evening unfolded beneath that shadow. Employees exchanged glances, questions multiplied, speculation grew, and Greg became increasingly agitated. Shorter conversations, sharper responses, more trips to the office. At one point he accidentally dropped a stack of papers. The sound echoed through the store. He reacted as though something far worse had happened. That was when I knew. Whatever he had been controlling was slipping, slowly, but unmistakably. Closing time finally arrived. Customers left, lights dimmed, the familiar end-of-day routine began. Then something unexpected happened. As I headed toward the employee exit, Ryan approached me, nervous, almost hesitant. "You got a minute?" I nodded. He handed me a folded piece of paper. My stomach tightened instantly. Not again. "What's this?" Ryan swallowed. "I found it in the shred bin." The shred bin. I unfolded the page. Only part of the document remained intact. Most had been destroyed. But not all. Just enough survived. My eyes moved across the visible lines, then stopped. I read them again, slower, carefully, because the sentence sitting in front of me changed everything. Not a theory, not an interpretation. A sentence. Plain, direct, undeniable. Store profitability remains strong despite projected lease adjustment. For a moment I couldn't speak. Neither could Ryan. The store was profitable. The lease increase was manageable. The property owners wanted renewal. Every surviving document pointed in the same direction. The crisis Greg had described simply wasn't there. And suddenly I understood something. This was never about rent, never about the building, never about the lease. Those were props, a backdrop, a story. The real objective had been somewhere else all along. I looked up from the paper, across the empty sales floor, toward the darkened office. The blinds were partially closed. A narrow strip of light still shone beneath the door. Greg was inside, alone. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about avoiding him. I wasn't thinking about surviving another shift. I wasn't thinking about keeping my head down. I was thinking about a conversation that now felt inevitable, because silence had protected my job, but the truth was beginning to protect something bigger, and somewhere behind that office door, Greg probably believed he still controlled the story. The next morning would reveal whether he was right, or whether, for the first time, someone else would be doing the talking.